this is the greatest scandal of the 21st century.
There were girls that were brought to Britain that were trafficked to Andrew. He ordered these girls out of a catalogue. Andrew was taking prostitutes into Buckingham Palace without giving their names. He went through 40 prostitutes in a 4-day period. I don't think people realise just how big the network was. Yesterday was the latest death threat that I've had. I've had to improve security on my house.
The most devastating royal biography ever written. Hello and welcome to the show. The Epstein scandal is the greatest political scandal, definitely of the 21st century, arguably in modern history. Every day seems to bring new revelations. The latest revelations we have now are that allegedly Jeffrey Epstein and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor wanted to organise a threesome with an exotic dancer for £10,000. And in this legal letter that's now been released in the Epstein files today, she said that there were a number of young girls at this party at which she was at who looked as if they were 14 years of age. It seems as if there is going to be no end to stories coming out over the days, weeks and months ahead. So I'm delighted that we have with us today the man to ask on all of this, Andrew Lownie, very distinguished biographer with many best-selling books. Most importantly, his latest book is called entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, which is a hard-hitting look at Andrew and Sarah. The Daily Mail says, I think quite accurately, the most devastating royal biography ever written. Welcome, Andrew.
Very nice.
A pleasure to have you here. Now, you and I, of course, are both royal historians, and last week we were on a show together before the latest tranche and latest dump of revelations from the Epstein files. And at that point, you said that the worst was still to come. There was a lot more to come on Andrew, and my gosh, you have been proved right on that. I said at the beginning there that I think this is the greatest scandal of the 21st century. I would go so far as to say it's more significant than the Profumo scandal, and I would say even than the abdication crisis.
I agree.
Because with the abdication crisis, obviously, that was a love affair. No one really knew about the Duke's or King Edward VIII's links to Nazism at that time, and everyone simply thought this was purely a romance. Would you agree that this is bigger than those?
Absolutely, and I've been saying that, and I mean, I slightly criticised for it. But I mean, there, as you say, it was a very smooth transition. He kind of went into exile very quickly. The revelations about his Nazi sympathies only came out much later, and I would say still, until my book, Traitor King, in 2021, I think there was still some doubt about that. But this is about financial corruption at the heart of the royal family, a senior member supported by a monarch, possibly two monarchs. It's about a senior royal involved, as you say, with young girls. I had a lot of material that was taken out of the book for legal reasons, which has now been proved to be true, not least the material on Mandelson. There's still a lot of material that I don't think I'm going to be able to put in for legal reasons, again involving underage girls. So this story, I think, is getting bigger and bigger. I don't think people realise just how big the network was and how shameless the behaviour was of some of these elites who kind of felt this droit de seigneur, and that they were basically masters of the universe and could do what they wanted. And I think it's exciting for me as someone who's in favour of transparency that, you know, we are now beginning to get a little bit more accountability.
Yes, and that's why I think it is such a big crisis, because, of course, it's not just the royal family, with Peter Mandelson, but you also have Bill Gates, Richard Branson, the Clintons. I mean, it's quite remarkable how wide the tentacles did go. But from all the revelations we've had so far, what is the one that's been most striking to you?
Well, I think this is not just a story about financial and sexual shenanigans. It's actually about national security. I think what is now emerging is that Epstein was a Soviet asset. A lot of the people in this story were very closely connected with Russian intelligence. And I think it's now becoming clearer and clearer that people like Andrew knew that. I've seen FBI documents, for example, which link Andrew to sex trafficking and money laundering rings run by Russian intelligence, and he's aware of that. There's certainly a lot of Kompromat on him, picked up in Russia through honey traps, also in Central Asia. So I don't have any doubt, and I write about this in the book, that there's Kompromat from Mossad, from intelligence agencies in North Africa and the Middle East. So this is now becoming a much bigger story. It's also a story about a cover-up, because I think he was enabled and protected for too long. People used to go and complain to the Queen, including MI6, 6, heads of the Foreign Office, and were sent away with a flea in their ear. The press who raised stories at the palace were told it wasn't true. When they were found to be true, legal letters were sent. I have the story of ABC Television wanting to run an interview with Virginia Giuffre and Andrew, and being basically threatened by the palace that if they ran it, they would no longer have access to members of the royal family. So they knew about this story, and they tried to sort of suppress it. So I don't think they can now claim, gosh, this is all surprise to us. He's been, I know, an accident waiting to happen for many, many years. He was appointed to this role as a trade envoy because, again, that's the side that kind of gets forgotten about. I think there's a case against him for misconduct in public office, rather like Peter Mandelson, quite apart from the sex trafficking. But that story was sort of, that appointment was made by Peter Mandelson against the advice of people like King Charles, who knew exactly what his brother was like. And the complaints were coming in within months of that appointment in 2001, and yet he continued to hold that role, taxpayer-funded, in effect, civil service role until 2011.
Yes, and of course, we've also had the Polish Prime Minister has just come out recently, yesterday, I think, as we're recording this, and said that he thinks Epstein was a Russian spy, a Russian asset, quite clearly. You think Andrew knew about that, which begs the question, why would he deliberately allow himself to be photographed? As you see him on all fours, massaging and doing whatever to this girl, he's clearly looking up into the camera. He must know this is a picture that shouldn't be taken. What is going on in his mind? Firstly, who is behind the camera? Is Epstein the one taking the photograph of Mandelson in his underwear of Andrew on all fours? Clearly, the Mandelson one was done surreptitiously. I think
exactly.
It's clear Kompromat.
I think it's a hidden camera, the Mandelson one. And I mean, clearly, in all these properties, that was in Epstein's property in Paris, but in all the properties there were cameras. The FBI have recovered some of that film. It's still in our FBI archives, and it's interesting that none of that stuff has emerged. There's a policeman from Palm Beach called Mark Dugan who was actually given some of these films, took them to Russia, and they seem to have found their way into the hands of Putin. So he certainly got this Kompromat there. But it is an extraordinary thing for Andrew to do. It shows the degree of intimacy that he had and trust in Epstein, that he kind of allowed this. For a man who doesn't drink, we can't blame that, he'd had too many glasses of wine. There's also this wild look in his eyes which suggests drug use. I mean, that has often been raised with me. I didn't write about that in the book, but I think there are some questions about, whether he was taking drugs of one sort or another, medicinal or recreational. But it is extraordinary arrogance to think this. I mean, what was the police protection officer doing? Was he sitting outside twiddling his thumbs? This does seem to be a huge lapse of security. But also, Andrew was taking prostitutes into Buckingham Palace without giving their names or background to the security officers there, which really concerned them. I've had problems getting hold of files from the 1930s about the royal family on the grounds it would jeopardize their security. And yet here we have him bringing people into the palace late at night who no one knows who they are, and being allowed to walk pretty unescorted around the palace. So I do think there's a big question here. I mean, what I would like is a parliamentary investigation into his time as a trade envoy between 2001 and 11, with the former heads of UKTI, former ambassadors, on oath to explain what was going on, because it's pretty clear that he was taking not only his daughters and his business partner, David Rowlands, but people like Jeffrey Epstein on these trips and actually shoehorning in meetings for them with people like the Chinese, fast-tracking banking licenses, as well as people on these trade delegations. And I think one of the shocking things is that David Rowlands ran a bank, the Bank Haviland, which specialized in banking facilities for people who couldn't get them otherwise, generally dodgy dictators. And the bank was used, it's now been shown, for money laundering. So what was Andrew doing involved with this? Why was he involved with a man called Arthur Lanchester as his accountant, who was the accountant for Baroness Mohn, and has been repeatedly criticized by tax authorities for the way he evades the system?
And Baroness Mohn was, of course, the businesswoman who was implicated in during the COVID era for fraudulently getting government loans or grants for items which weren't delivered on as well. We'll just take some of these, stage by stage. It's a very important point you make about, of course, the access that was given to these women in royal residences. We've had a second woman come forward with an allegation that she was actually sex trafficked into Royal Lodge, where he was living until recently on the grounds of Windsor, and that after she had sex with Andrew allegedly, she got a tour and tea at Buckingham Palace. But here we have evidence, and apparently, that royal residences were places where sex trafficked women were being brought into, which of course means that they now become open to criminal investigation themselves.
Absolutely. And that's why I say there's a case not just under misconduct in public office, but there's a case for sex trafficking. And I've got lots of testimony of girls. I mean, there were girls that were brought to Britain that were trafficked to Andrew. He ordered these girls out of a catalogue. They didn't just turn up by chance. These weren't sort of good time girls. They were often models who were promised contracts, given visas, often a Russian who couldn't speak English, who were then basically found themselves trapped in this country and were farmed out to some of Epstein's associates. So, and then of course, so there's a separate, and then clearly he had the Kompromat on them. So I think there's a really strong case for the Met to look at the case again. I think they've claimed to investigate it 3 times and found nothing there, when I mean, it's patently obvious there is a case to answer.
And of course, the presence of so many Russian girls lends itself also to thinking that maybe the Russian state was behind some of this in providing so many Russian girls who could then escape to Russia and be beyond investigation. Now, you've also described Andrew as a sex addict, and in your works you've also said that actually he was even more extreme than Jeffrey Epstein himself was, and more promiscuous. Can you expand on that and the dynamic of that relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, Epstein described him, he said, I'm kinky, but here's the king of kink. I mean, a lot of the stuff I had to take out on grounds of taste and personal sort of privacy. But yeah, Andrew, I think, was abused as a child. I mean, the story of him being taken to a brothel by the parent of a friend at the age of 11 does seem to be true. I kind of floated it there, not wondering if it was true, but I've had it now from so many different independent sources that I think that was some truth there. And I think that might partly explain his sex addiction. He finds it very difficult to establish long-term relationships with people. I mean, his big thing is prostitutes or masseurs who then have to give him a happy ending. And these masseurs have been brought to him until quite recently. I mean, I know from talking to members of staff that 2 women were brought to him, for example, every Sunday afternoon until quite recently at Royal Lodge.
Thailand as well, I think.
Well, there's a story in Thailand that people found very hard to believe, which I got from a Reuters correspondent, on the record, Andrew McGregor-Marshall, from a diplomat in the embassy, Ian Proud, and actually from a member of the Thai royal family, all saying the same thing. On a trip to Thailand for the birthday of the king, he went through 40 prostitutes in a 4-day period. And this included his official engagements and actually going off at one point to Chiang Mai with his mistress at the time, a woman called Sonia Cooling. So, I mean, this is quite well documented. In fact, and Ian Proud later wrote about this further to what he told me, and other journalists like Tom Sykes said that they knew the story and didn't feel that they could write it. And I think what's gratifying is that since the book's come out, people feel more prepared to come forward with information they had, stories they had that they didn't feel they could talk about. The press feels more emboldened to report, shall we say, slightly more critically on some of these issues.
So do you feel vindicated now, having been the lone voice in the wilderness for so long?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I feel, it's good not to be the lone voice. It's good, to have other people begin to say this, that the things that I feel are important and are now being discussed about accountability. I'm also trustee of the Campaign for Freedom of Information. So, I mean, I've been talking about this for a long time. And I think it's important. And I think it's important for the royal family that if they want to continue to get the support, the respect, the trust of the British public, they do need to be slightly more transparent. And there seems to be more people saying that. I don't think they can continue being secretive, never complain, never explain, hope the scandal will pass over, because it won't. I think it's been driven by social media, by citizen journalism, and I think also by people who are outside the royal rota, who are more prepared to to speak truth to power. And that's, after all, what, journalists and historians should be doing.
If you believe in the value of the work the New Culture Forum does, please do become a member. You can receive several benefits ranging from exclusive member content, invitations to private events, visits to our studios here, a chance to meet the NCF team, and a lot more. You can join via the link below or via our website. Thank you, and back to the show. Yeah. Now, we're only a few minutes into this, and you've already laid some amazingly explosive revelations, which will shock many of our viewers. And there's a lot more of that in this book and elsewhere. But the question I have, of course, is what intimidation or legal threats did you encounter from the Yorks or from their wider circles, legal threats or other forms of intimidation to try to deter you from writing this sort of a book?
Well, I mean, even before the book came out, Collins, my publishers, and I were receiving legal letters from Paul Tweed, who acts for Sarah Ferguson, saying they were, we were on notice. They were looking at my social media accounts, that be very careful what you write. A podcast I did for The Sun before the book came out, they complained about, and actually the podcast was removed. And in return, The Sun ran a very flattering interview with Sarah Ferguson just after, and I've never been asked back for comment or to appear on anything in The Sun, so we know where their sympathies lie. I've had even yesterday was the latest death threat that I've had. I've had to improve security on my house. I've had briefings against me when the book first came out, where a lot of papers did interviews that were never run. I had a very critical review by the Telegraph before the book was even published. So they couldn't possibly have read it. There have been attempts to stories that I use prostitutes, that I'm a paedophile, that I'm not a serious historian, that I'm a Republican, that I make it all up, etc. So yeah, a lot has been thrown at me, and indeed others. And I've just seen the campaign against Virginia Giuffre. I mean, Andrew, who claimed that he didn't even remember her, which I think is even more disturbing than if he had claimed that he did, was actually trying to create to book PR firms to discredit her. And even now, there are still people who are putting out information about her, saying was a prostitute, she made it all up, etc. So, I mean, it's really, really frightening. I mean, we certainly had, for example, for my book, a whole series of one-star reviews, which I've never had for books. I mean, what's interesting, if you look at the reviews from verified accounts, and where people write more than 2 words, those are 5-star, but there's a whole bunch of stuff, and it appears elsewhere with people with very few followers, for example. So, and I was told that an Arab billionaire had actually paid for a PR campaign to try and discredit the book. Simon & Schuster, who were due to publish the book at the same time as Collins, pulled out of the contract weeks before the book was published, for giving their explanation was the book was unreadable. Well, since it's gone to number 1 on the bestseller list, it spent 6 weeks there. It's sold well. It's had good reviews. I've been writing books for 40 years. They've all had good reviews. It's very hard to believe that is the case. So one wonders, why did Simon & Schuster cancel this book at such short notice, a book that they bought on a finished script?
And I have to say, as a historian, this is very well footnoted and referenced. So you have obviously made sure that everything there you say is watertight. You do say also that actually the public may not be aware of how integral Andrew and Sarah were to Epstein's enterprise and to his endeavors. Can you expand on that?
Yes, well, I mean, that's very much coming out now in the leaks. I mean, we're lots and lots of references to them. The line was that they'd both of them had met him in the 1990s, that they parted company in the spring of 2011. They hardly had any contact with him. Now, I knew this wasn't the case. I did write about this in the book. The reality is that they were actually mixing with him in the mid-1980s. This hasn't really come out yet, but we certainly trace it back to the early 1990s. Even Andrew's own private secretary, Alistair Watson, wrote to the Times and said this relationship goes back to 1991. We know now from some of the email leaks that they continue to be in contact with Epstein almost until his death. I found a dog walker who chatted to the doorman at about the block of flats that Epstein had flats in that were owned by his brother on 66th Street. For Sarah Ferguson was staying there on a regular basis until at least 2014. We know that most of the things that Andrew said in the Newsnight interview have proved to be untrue. That's absolutely backs up everything I found. I mean, the two of them lie about things they don't even need to lie about. So it was a very deep relationship. Where they stayed was called the Britannia Suite at the house in Manhattan. And we know that Epstein gave her much more money than she claimed. She claimed £15,000. Well, I was told the figure was more like 2 million. And we're certainly she was asking for £20,000 at a time, we've seen in some of these disclosures. I think also is the way that they used poor old Epstein. Sarah would invite us, some of these disclosures show she would invite herself to stay, bringing her two daughters, and asking for first class travel and business class travel for all of them. And Epstein was paying this. And why was he paying this? Because, of course, she was the way into Andrew and the way into the royal family, the way to create kudos and credibility for himself.
And of course, it's inconceivable that Sarah could have been living there, could have been with him so long and not thought something fishy was going on, surely. I mean, they say love is blind, but I mean, there comes a point where you have to ask whether she was deliberately, willfully turning a blind eye to things.
Absolutely. I mean, you couldn't stay in, not so much in Manhattan, but certainly in Palm Beach without seeing the picture. I mean, Epstein was very open about it. He didn't think that sex with underage girls there was anything wrong with that. So there were pictures of young naked girls all over the house. There were condoms all over the place. There were often young girls frolicking naked in the pool. So it was inconceivable not to see this. There's talk now in these files of an English duchess who wrote basically a guide to people coming to stay. And the line was, see no evil, hear no evil. And that doesn't surprise me because she's a completely immoral person. And if Epstein was paying her debts, she would have turned a blind eye.
And, going back to the potential of Epstein being a Russian asset, it would seem, of course, one of the ways you get Kompromat is by talking to people who have loose lips. And I would think Sarah Ferguson is the sort of person who does relish gossip and indiscreet comments and but perhaps telling a bit too much about what goes on with other people's lives.
Absolutely. I mean, people say, what did they have, what could they talk about? But this was exactly when I did Guy Burgess, his role in this Cambridge spy ring. I mean, he gave them documents. Everyone gets excited by that. But actually what he did was he told them about the peccadillos of some of the people in the Foreign Office, the politicians he dealt with. And this was then used in black propaganda back or for Kompromat. Kompromat is about the first thing when you go to the KGB spy school, now FSB, is what they do. They do it on their own citizens. Anyone, I'm sure you've had the same experience. Anyone who goes to Moscow is told, if a pretty girl comes up to you in the bar, be very, very careful. You're no more attractive in Russia than you were in London.
Now, we only have half the Epstein files released. We have another 3 million. We have 2 more Eiffel Towers worth of documents that haven't been released to the public. But the DOJ, the Department of Justice, says that they've done everything that they need to do. Do you think there's a lot more still to come? Do those files have even more smoking guns there? Will they ever see the light of day?
Well, I hope they'll see the light of day. There is a lot more. I mean, this is the stuff that they've held back for various reasons, to protect certain individuals or because they're too sensational. But the law was that the bill was that everything should be released. I know that victims have been identified even from what has been released, so I don't think they can use that excuse. So I do hope that this other 3 million will be released. There are clearly plenty of redactions in the stuff that has been released, and I think there should be a fight to get some of those lifted. I think public opinion and disquiet won't be satisfied until there's a sense that, they have been completely open. Of course, these files are only part of the DOJ investigation and stuff that they took from the Epstein estate. There's clearly stuff in the Epstein estate that never found its way into investigations, and that stuff could be released. There are witnesses coming forward, like the stripper who's just turned up, and others. There are legal depositions conditions that could be released. And I've had pretty much every day since the book came out in August, people coming forward, former members of staff, school friends, naval colleagues, diplomats, all these people who are not in any of these files, with stories about Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. So there's a lot more that can come out. And as I keep saying, it's not going to get any better. You were alluding there to young girls. I have plenty of material that didn't go into the book about young girls, about bribes, and about other names, other well-known names in British political life, including a very senior British politician involved in a threesome with Ghislaine Maxwell, since threesomes seem to be the flavour of the month at the moment.
So will that be coming out in another update to this book, in a paperback or another book? Or
the updated paperback will be out on 21st of May. I mean, I haven't written it yet, and I don't know what the lawyers will let through. I'm also going to do a follow-up alongside a book I'm doing on Prince Philip called Untitled, Epstein and the House of Windsor.
Oh, fascinating. So obviously, I think there's a huge amount of debate still. People are split as to whether Epstein committed suicide or whether he was killed. For a long time, the prevailing view was, well, if he was killed, it would have been by some wealthy oligarch who would have ordered it. But now, of course, we have Mossad and we have the Kremlin involved in all of this too, who potentially could have been the ones to knock him off. Do you have any ideas or theories as to what you think may have happened to him in reality?
Well, I mean, I used to be slightly undecided about the death, because he did write a will 2 days before he died. But all the evidence that I've seen since the book came out, I had lunch with Mark Epstein, his brother, just the other day. Mark Epstein who thinks he was killed by Trump, is about to release new medical evidence to support homicide. And I think certainly the evidence I've seen, which is a mixture of people who knew what Epstein was like and his character and his narcissism and the state of the legal thing, some of the medical evidence, Michael Barden, the coroner, has said that it's homicide rather than suicide. The cover-up that went on, the fact the cameras weren't working, that guards were asleep, the way that the whole thing was dealt with afterwards, without people being given access to the autopsy, the fact that no one has been penalized in any way for losing this very important suicide risk, all makes me think it's murder. Now, as you say, there are lots of characters in the frame. Russia, Mossad, one of the people who might have been named, he was threatening to go to the authorities on the day before he died. The question is how they had access. I mean, there are lots of stories that the person who killed him was a fellow inmate who did it for some form of remission of sentence. Now, that kind of limits who had the ability to do that. So I think there are a lot of unexplained questions, and I have to say, a lot of unexplained deaths. There's still questions about Virginia Giuffre's suicide and about Jean-Luc Brunel's suicide. This was the model owner who was supplying girls and who'd been arrested and was in prison.
And there are also, of course, huge questions surrounding the wealth and income of Andrew at Mountbatten-Windsor. We were led to believe that he didn't really have much money to survive, that he couldn't afford to keep Royal Lodge going on his own, but he seemed to have been able to do that once the king did remove financing from there. You claim that Andrew is much wealthier than people think. So what is the source of that wealth and income?
Well, like all members of the royal family, I mean, money is passed down through trusts. We don't see royal wills, so we don't know how that's done, but I understand he had money from the Queen Mother. He may well have got money from the Queen, I don't know, at an earlier stage, 7 years before she died. He has made a lot of money over the years from investments and from his basically sidelines. We saw this with Pitch at the Palace, where he took a 2% cut that was ostensibly meant to be a charity cut from investors and entrepreneurs. And we saw, I think, £200,000 being transferred between accounts just the other day. He had an account in China. He had all sorts of offshore accounts. So we have a story of him with a $5 million bribe in Kazakhstan, another taking a £3.85 million commission in Kazakhstan for introducing a Greek water company to the country. So he was dealing in large sums of money. He had just he's only a few years ago sold a Swiss chalet for, I think, £15 million. Sarah Ferguson has just sold a house for £4 million in Belgravia. So there are some large sums of money running around. And though he was running Royal Lodge, it's expensive, he wasn't paying any rent. estate. He was eventually having to pay for security. So, there are lots of questions about the wealth, but he certainly is not short of a bob or two. I have no doubt that he is continuing to do business, that there are still opportunities that he's exploring in places like China and the Middle East. But of course, the problem is that the royal finances are completely opaque, and we just don't know.
It does beg the question why the king was financing anything at all, though, if he has such access to such sorts of money.
It's a weird question. I mean, it's sort of slightly what happened with Edward VIII. When he abdicated and George VI and everyone was looking at whether he should be given either money by the royal family or money from the civil list, they discovered that he had actually creamed off large sums of money from his time at the Duchy of Cornwall. He was giving very expensive jewels to Wallis Simpson. And he didn't actually need this money. So very difficult to do the due diligence. I know they've tried to do due diligence on Beatrice and Eugenie to make sure that they're squeaky clean in terms of their finances. And the daughters have refused to allow any sort of audit, which again raises questions about how they're earning their money.
Yes, we'll get to them in a moment too. You mentioned Kazakhstan. I know you said that Tony Blair was involved with Andrew in Kazakhstan. Now, Tony Blair's quite litigious. I'm not sure how much you're allowed to say or not on that point.
I'm not allowed to say much, but I understand that, for example, he organised the photo opportunity with the president of Kazakhstan and Andrew. I mean, I think the thing that people are looking at very carefully is that Andrew was doing a lot of business in Kazakhstan, I think on his own account, as also in Azerbaijan. The son-in-law of the president of Kazakhstan bought Andrew's marital home, Sunninghill, given to him as a gift by the Queen for £3 million more than it was advertised. It's now being made clear from a BBC investigation this was laundered money. This sale was done through a secretive trust. There doesn't seem to have been due diligence by the Queen's solicitors, Farr & Co., into where this money came from. So again, this question of these purchases all being done under secretive trusts, whether Andrew paid any sort of tax on this, whether there was capital gains or anything else. These are the questions I think people are beginning to ask now.
And another question surrounds, of course, China, and some of the revelations have been quite fascinating. I mean, we know, of course, about his association with Yang Tengbo, the alleged Chinese spy, and his involvement with this Chinese Eurasia Fund, but also now apparently a long-standing relationship with the president of China himself, Xi Jinping, which is quite fascinating.
Yep. And very close to the Chinese ambassador. I mean, when no one would come to his, I think, 60th birthday party, the Chinese ambassador was there. There's also a man called Johnny Hon, who's been paying Sarah Ferguson hundreds of £1,000s a year without explaining what that was for. Neither will she explain it. The problem was that in terms of penetrating the British establishment, both the Chinese and the Russians found the easiest way to do it was through the royal family, because there was so little scrutiny of them. Because Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were so greedy, it was very easy to draw them in. And then, of course, it gave respectability to these people. They were introduced to other useful contacts, and so the thing grew from there. But you're absolutely right. I mean, everyone gets very excited about Tenbo, but there were lots and lots of Chinese spies, moving in these circles. We know the Chinese targeted politicians, universities, and it's not a surprise they should target the royal family.
Now, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. He still is the Duke of Windsor. He's no longer His Royal Highness. He's His Grace the Duke of Windsor is his current title, but we'll call him Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor for now. He was hoping to stay in Royal Lodge a bit longer, but because of the revelations recently of the new batch of Epstein files, it seems as if the king has basically said, no, you need to go immediately to Sandringham. And so he's now gone to Wood Farm, which was formerly where his father, Prince Philip, used to live, whilst Marsh Farm is being renovated. However, you don't think that he's actually going to end up living at Marsh Farm either at all or for very long?
No, that's, just an instinct. I think the problem was that he was cheerily waving to people riding around the Windsor estate or driving out, and this was a constant bad look for the royal family. So they clearly needed to get him. What they kind of do is get you away and into exile. That's what they did with the Duke of Windsor. And clearly, they clearly have some hold over him because he's gone. I understand there's a tug of war going on between the king, who's going to try and keep him in Sandringham, where he can supposedly keep an eye on him, and Andrew, who wants to go to the sunny climes of somewhere in the Middle East. And I think Andrew will win that argument. King Juan Carlos, who spends some time in the Middle East, does jet around the world. Very difficult to follow his movements. I mean, he's flying in private jets, and I think that's what we'll have with Andrew. I mean, but I don't think Andrew's going to be looking out of the window at Sandringham over a wet winter, wondering what he can do. He can do his business now under the radar. He's got lots of friends in the Middle East who treat him, almost the ruling families there, as another son, and it would make perfect sense to go there where there's very little press scrutiny and where there's a ready supply of young women.
So not necessarily a flight risk per se, but also a way to avoid all the pressure for him to testify, whether probably not going over to Congress, but, he could be not compelled, but he could be required to give evidence here in a UK court to America, although he can't incriminate himself. But you think he'll probably just escape all of that by going off to the Middle East or elsewhere?
Absolutely. The last thing that the royal family want is him actually spilling the beans or a trial. He's spent the last 15 years avoiding talking about this. He doesn't respond to any of the rights to reply the newspapers give him. He's scarpered up to Balmoral to avoid the summons from Virginia Giffray. He's refused to cooperate with lawyers, the victims, with law enforcement. There was even a mutual legal assistance under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. There was attempts by law enforcement, and he refused all of them. So I don't think he's going to talk to anyone now unless he does so to PC Plod, and that's, I'm afraid, what the next stage has to be. But when that situation starts, that's the point that I think he'll be on the first plane out of Northolt.
Now, you've already made mention to the two daughters, to Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, who have hitherto escaped relatively unscathed from this whole saga. And I think the British public believe that the sins of the father mustn't be meted out onto the child. You're somewhat less sympathetic to the two of them, though. So can you explain why that is?
Yes, I gathered a lot of material on the daughters. I didn't use it. I felt that the focus should be on the parents. But I think, I'm afraid that the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. There is a lot of material that I have, and I expect others have, about their activities, particularly in the Middle East, using their contacts what they built up from their royal connections to make money for themselves, supporting, for example, Saudi banks and other things. In fact, their jobs, which are in client relations, come on the strength of their contacts book. So I think it would be very wise for the king to draw them too closely in, because I think there are some scandals that could emerge there. The wisest thing, I think, for them is to give up their titles, to basically retire from public life, apart from their charities, get on with their jobs and their families. And I think then the public will feel that, that's absolutely fine and they should be allowed to build their lives. But I think if a new scandal arises, which I think is highly likely, about them basically grifting like their parents, then that's going to be a big problem. And if the king has allowed them to come back and do royal duties, to be involved with royal charities, that's not going to reflect very well on him.
And it's a great challenge, obviously, because the monarchy is much slimmer than it was intended to be with the departure of the Yorks and also of the Sussexes. And so you do need to have a full panoply of royals to do these events. And so there is obviously the pressure and tension there to bring more junior royals into the working side of things. But looking at the monarchy then from a broader perspective, how would you grade the monarchy's response to all of this?
I would give them, I'm afraid, a D-. I think that they didn't move as swiftly as they could have done. I mean, even up to before last October, this problem was known about. There were lots. He shouldn't have been allowed to continue as a trade envoy as long as he did. They should have not allowed him to do pitch at the palace. I mean, he was basically abusing a charity in Buckingham Palace and James's Palace. I think when these complaints were brought, they should have been addressed rather than people sent away and penalized for raising them. I think that they should have been much stricter with him. I mean, maybe remove these titles, maybe push him into exile, use the fact that they were in effect bankrolling him. I think there should have been statements. I think there should be some leadership now in the way that this Queen made a statement after Diana died because of public outrage. outrage. I think they need to get ahead of the story. They need to, for example, offer up to be much more transparent, to actually say what they knew and why they acted in the way they did, to apologize if they've been covering for him, as I believe they have, and to say we want to clean the stables out, we want to draw a new line. I don't think William wants to inherit this problem. This is going to define Charles's reign, and I think this is an opportunity for him to be very robust and open about this scandal. It's always the best way to deal with it. The cover-up now becomes a bigger problem than the original sin. And this is an opportunity for them to say, look, we've got a new path here. We are going to be very much more transparent and accountable. And, you know, this is a lone episode. We're not all like this. And let's get focused on the important things we do rather than this, what they would call distraction.
And obviously, the Prince of Wales has a very different attitude to, and much less sympathy for his uncle than obviously the king would have for his own brother, and of course, Her late Majesty did for him too. Now, I don't know how much you can discuss Peter Mandelson, for example, but why do you think Peter Mandelson was paid so little? I mean, if you think about it, he's a rich man himself, not hugely rich, but I mean, he's got an income. £10,000 for his husband's osteopathy course doesn't seem like a huge amount he would need to pay. And then we have this, I think it's $25,000 paid 3 times, and that seems to me to be a rather small, cheap meal.
Absolutely. I think what's so extraordinary is how cheaply these people can be bought. But my experiences with rich people is that they don't like to put their hands in their pockets. That's perhaps why they're so rich. And I think it's back to the sense of entitlement, this idea that people are lucky to work for you or to give you money. Sarah Ferguson had the same sort of attitude. I mean, some of the sums were small. I mean, she was earning huge sums of money and still caging money off other people. Churchill had it. I mean, he had money and got Brendan Backen to pay for Chartwell. So I think it's just an attitude that somehow they don't need to put their hands in their own pockets because this is their due. But I agree, it makes them very vulnerable, and it's extraordinary that this was, they're allowed to happen. But, again, Mandelson's like Sarah Ferguson. They constantly get themselves into these scrapes, and they somehow repeatedly seem to be able to escape them and to reinvent themselves and to go on again. But I think in both cases, they've now run out of their 9 lives.
Yes, the master of the dark arts has finally had his comeuppance, I think. What's amazing, of course, also is that the 2 great casualties of all of this haven't been Americans. They've been British people, obviously, Mandelson and in Andrew, whereas in America, you had some allegations against Bill Gates, but by and large, you haven't had the great destruction of characters as we've seen over in this country.
I think that's for several reasons. I think some of the co-conspirators did a deal with the DOJ. I mean, there are a whole series of names that have been raised in the past, and it'd be interesting to see what happens and if that deal unravels. I think if now the 3 million pages are released, I think that's where we'll see a lot of this American stuff. I think that, a lot of the victims are under NDAs as part of the payoffs there, but I think we may get other people coming forward with naming people. I mean, some of them are so appalled by the cover-up that they've threatened to go public. So, I don't think the Americans are off the hook yet, but you're absolutely right. It's the sort of low-hanging fruit. I mean, the DOJ have kind of shaped this very selective release, which has focused attention on Britain and, of course, away from Trump and his colleagues. I mean, his Secretary for Commerce, a great friend of Sarah Ferguson, Howard Lutwick, who was actually sponsored her charities in the States and gave her accommodation in the Twin Towers. I mean, he now has been shown to be lying, saying that he cut contact with Epstein, found appalling, and yet years later he's asking to go and stay on his island. So, I think there will be some more names coming out. There's some stories, which I think we need to investigate more about strange goings on in the ranch, in Sorrow Ranch in
New Mexico.
New Mexico, with people disappearing. The story of 2 girls who died in rough sex who've disappeared. So it's all becoming much darker. I describe it as Eyes Wide Shut meets The Crown meets Yes Minister.
And I think Richard Branson's also had his name involved in this as well.
Branson is involved. Branson, again, is very close to Sarah Ferguson, and a woman called Sarah Ransom said that she was trafficked to him. He threatened to sue her. She recanted, and now she has doubled down on that, I think, feeling maybe she's in a stronger position. So I do think someone like Richard Branson needs to be looked at. I mean, it's many of the familiar, usual suspects that the rumours have circulated about for years. I think one of the interesting things is that Mark Thatcher was one of Andrew's sort of business partners in Kazakhstan. That's a story that hasn't really emerged.
And I think the fact that the Clintons were dragged kicking and screaming to give evidence. I mean, they tried their very best not to speak. And of course, it was only when they faced subpoena that they actually finally did that. And I wonder whether if they do that, that will set the precedent that will make others fall in line behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I hope everyone who can help the inquiry will talk. I mean, my own feeling about the Clintons is he's maybe not as culpable as others, that he was worried that this was a political witch hunt. And that was why he was reluctant to get involved. But I think, it is important that people come forward. And as you say, this could be an example and put pressure on others to do so.
Well, Andrew, we don't normally deal with salacious and sordid stories like this on this channel, but it is an issue which is of fundamental importance to democracy, transparency, deals with corruption and the institutions of state, which are subjects we do deal with, so very much on topic. The book is entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York by Andrew Lownie, a gripping read, well worth reading, as are all of Andrew's books. I do hope you'll come back for your next work, but in the meantime, thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. We're going to be having an extra bit of content for our members. If you want to watch that, do go to our website, become a member. You get a whole range of perks and benefits. We can't do any of this without your support. And if you do join us, we'll see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. If you're enjoying NCF content, please do join our membership scheme at the link below or by going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Your support is vital for us. Put simply, we simply can't do what we do without your support. From as little as £4 a month, you will receive a range of perks and benefits. At the lower tiers, this includes exclusive member-only content, discounted or free tickets to our national events, our annual conference, our prestigious annual lecture presented by a famous public figure, and our 2-day literary festival where we platform speakers who've been cancelled by other literary festivals. Other perks coming soon include exclusive member-only events, and you'll be able to join me on private tours and visits to historic sites around the UK where you're guaranteed a non-woke experience that celebrates Britain's history and heroes. Higher tiers get free copies of our books, invitations to private events in our studios, chances to meet the NCF team, and much more. So please do join today. Your support means we can continue to fight to defend Britain and the British people and keep politicians' feet to the fire, whatever party they are from. We are not just a YouTube channel. We are also a think tank that produces high-quality publications, conferences, lectures, events, and of course our NCF Locals program. We have almost 40 branches across the nation, from Edinburgh down to Exeter and across the sea to Belfast. A true national movement, a countercultural movement. We're the only think tank or channel to have such a movement. Wherever you live, you're probably within close proximity to a place where you can meet kindred spirits, hear from great speakers, and none of this, of course, can be done without your vital help. Thank you.